when we talk about research methodology and talk about the designs, research designs, basically there are three broad designs that we find. Of these three, which are followed in social sciences, one is quantitative, another one is qualitative, and the other one is mixed method research. So when we talk about qualitative research or when we talk about quantitative research, we are basically talking about as two distinct methods, whereas mixed method is of a different kind altogether. So in this lecture, we are trying to understand what is the usefulness of this, understanding these three methods and where these methods can be employed. Now let's see how these three have their kind of niche in the research. One is, one can understand any research topic or any study either through quantitative methods or qualitative methods or by mixed method. That means same problem can be studied in different ways. Now these three have distinct kind of positioning in social science research as far as the designs are concerned. Now when we look at this, they are employed basing on the nature of inquiry that we take up. Now if we see that these three are basically of a scientific inquiry but of different levels. One is, when we talk about the qualitative research, the emphasis is on qualities of the entities and processes. When we talk about the quantitative, in fact, as we can see by the very word itself, it is to deal with the systematic and scientific understanding of quantitative properties of the phenomena and the kind of settings of that phenomena. On the contrary, mixed method basically involves, or it tries to integrate both qualitative and quantitative methods in terms of collecting data, in terms of analyzing the data, and also in terms of integrating the results. Now let us see each one and then how mixed method is considered to be a kind of a combination of these two methods, and the advantages of it also we can see that. Now when we talk about qualitative research, the emphasis is on qualities of entities and emphasis is also on the processes, whereas the other ones don't look at the processes so much. That means here what we find is, many a time qualitative research may have a hypothesis or may not have an hypothesis. When we talk about qualitative research, the emphasis is on, first of all, the socially constructed nature of reality and the kind of relationship between the research and the researched. That means the persons who gather the data and the persons who give us the information, the kind of relationship and the kind of constraints that are posed at the time of inquiry. That means the kind of constraints also shape the inquiry. That means if I have some problem or the respondent has a problem, that can have influence on the flow of information. It is basically a kind of a subjective assessment of attitudes or opinions or behavior of the persons who are giving us the information in the field context. That means it is their subjective assessment. We have to evaluate that, or we have to analyze that. Results are generally in terms of non-quantitative form or in a form which are subjected to very less rigorous quantitative treatment. And what we find is, when we want to do qualitative research, lot of other different kinds of techniques like group discussions, projective techniques, in-depth interviews or key informant interviews or role play or name whatever you have under this, they can be used. Now That means qualitative research, if you really look at it, the advantage of qualitative research is it develops theory. That means it is always trying to, because it explores and tries to understand the phenomena and try to look at the past theories and then tries to either develop new ones or contradict the old ones. It, in other words, provides us a meaning, or it describes a meaning, or it discovers a meaning. This is also an important aspect of qualitative research. That means you get an in-depth understanding of a phenomena. It also uses methods like participant observation, semi-structured interview, or informal interviews, or focus group discussions, etc. Now, most of the thing that happens here is it is the questions and answers are exchanged in a two-way communication between the researcher and the respondent, which means the way a researcher is trying to pose questions also influences the respondent, or the way we behave towards the respondents also influences our information. So questions are mostly very loosely specified, and hardly you will have any kind of possible answers fed to the respondent, but we go with a kind of interview guide, or what we call checklist, where we can say we can specify what kind of questions can be asked and what possible answers are expected. So here we select respondents, again very interestingly, it is based on maximization of the information. That means if I talk to some person, I can get the maximum set of information. That means every respondent is not considered as different but as unique. That is where we call them as a key person. That means our idea is to maximize the information. And another important aspect of qualitative research is, or research designs is, analysis is simultaneously carried on while we are collecting the data. And you can also formulate your analysis simultaneously while you are collecting the data itself. That means data collection time you can analyze, data collection time you can also start formulating your writing up. So typical kinds of analysis that are generally employed in qualitative information is critical analysis and interpretation of source materials. Here we are trying to summarize the interview transcripts and also trying to summarize observation. Sometimes content analysis is also used for this purpose. So what we generally do is existing theories are used as a beginning point, departure, and that is we start with the existing theories for the analysis, and suddenly we see if there are problems, we alter them or change them. That means theories can further be developed by forming new concepts. And practical application of theory is always illustrated by cases. So now what kind of data we find here? Data are in the form of written field notes, diaries or pictures, mostly in a written form and a narrative form, or most of a ethnographic kind of a form. Now this being the qualitative approach, what is quantitative approach? Because one, if you apply, you get certain kind of information. The other one talks about something else, because that is subjective, whereas it is more objective when we talk about quantitative research. Here we are using numbers, and data we express it in terms of numerical manner. That means here you will only talk in terms of numbers, you will only measure things, and the guiding hypothesis always exists in quantitative research. What it does is it tries to test a theory, because you have a hypothesis deduced from a theory and you test the theory based on that. So in other words, the approach here is a deductive logic, that is theory to hypothesis, hypothesis to observation, and then back to theory. So in a way it deals with the specific questions and variables. This is very important for us to keep in mind. It uses methods of data collection which are highly structured, and the process of measurement is always central to quantitative research. This is the difference between qualitative and quantitative. The emphasis is on analysis of causal relationship. What kind of causal relationship exists between variables rather than the processes? Because here emphasis is not on processes, but emphasis is on kind of relationship that exists amongst a set of variables. Different types of variables we talk about, like dependent, independent, extraneous, or other kinds of variables. So the basic principle in quantitative research is that of correlation. Correlation does not mean causation. That is important. We are not talking in terms of causal aspects. We are only trying to see whether there is any causal relationship. It's not necessary there is a correlation, means there is an association, that's all. So what we focus is on, we focus it on broad trends. And quantitative research, if you look at, is always undertaken in a value-free framework. That means my data are not influenced by my mental framework or my own kind of behavior. So in other words, what happens is, it can be undertaken, anybody can go and collect the data, because once your instruments are formalized, and the researcher therefore becomes independent from data gathering process. Anybody can collect the data and anybody can analyze the data. That's the thing. Now, if you really look at quantitative research, you can have quantitative research into three categories. One is an inferential type approach, second one experimental approach, third one is simulation approach. When I talk about inferential approach, in fact, we gather the database through survey method and draw inferences about the characteristics of relationship amongst the variables. That is inferential, that the very word itself, we infer from that. Experimental approach is that we control variables. That means you can control research environment. Some variables you manipulate in order to see the impact or effect of the other variables on them. That is where you talk in terms of experimenting on the variables. And a number of examples can be given. In the rural development area, if a program is introduced, what is the impact of the program? You can test it, where you can take a control sample in a village which is not introduced, in experimental one where you have introduced that. So it is that kind of an approach we find it. Simulation approach is, we construct an artificial environment. That means we create similar kind of this thing, and we presume that if things are given, it will happen like this. So we try to provide initial conditions and provide parameters and exogenous variables, and try to simulate or run a simulation in order to see how the behavior of the process over time happens. And data collection methods, if you really look at as far as the quantitative research is concerned, they are basically based on structured observations or structured questionnaires or schedules or structured interviews. That means it is all completely structured ones, because if you try to introduce into this any open-ended questions and all that, it becomes more complex and more problematic, because a survey data which runs in large numbers, it's difficult to be analyzed that way. So closed questions and answers categories are prepared much in advance, and you select also respondents on a sample basis or a representative basis. So sample size and also the selection of the sample, all of them are based on certain assumptions with regard to the distribution of the sample population in a given area. So analysis of data can only be done, unlike the qualitative one, after data collection is completed. Now we generally employ very standard statistical methods in analyzing the data. Now, if you really look at what kinds of, because there we saw what kind of data are generated, how they appear like. Here, we find the analysis, if you really look at the forms of analysis, are cross tabulations or correlation analysis or test of significance, or you have other kinds of analysis of variance, etc. Now, the process of analysis is basically, as we saw, is deductive. That means you have a priori deducted theories are operationalized and tested on the data. That means you verify and test the theories, and that can lead to new theories. Now these two we have seen. That is first qualitative approach and the quantitative approach. Both have advantages. At the same time, if you employ both of them independently without taking into consideration the others, it has its own drawbacks. So now it is very well accepted that no single method can provide a comprehensive picture of a problem that we are going to research. And complementarity of both qualitative and quantitative methods also is well accepted. Then nobody says both are mutually exclusive. They are complementary to each other. So the dilemma of methodology, whether to choose qualitative or quantitative, is resolved by adopting middle path approach, what we call mixed methods. The mixed methods adopt, so unlike the qualitative and quantitative methods, they adopt or they encourage to combine use of both qualitative and quantitative research elements. That means they can be employed judiciously in order to answer complex questions. This is an important advantage of mixed methods. So therefore, it can offer better understanding of a research problem than the qualitative and the quantitative methods, because it combines both qualitative and quantitative components in the research to be pursued. And that is where we find the major points of value of mixed method, unlike the other two, is triangulation. Now we find in many of the researches, the participatory rural appraisals or participatory methodologies involve both. That is where it is first thing important to understand is there is a method which is adopted, which is of value, is a triangulation. That means for mixed method, triangulation is one of the important contributions, because triangulation means I can use different approaches in order to verify, in order to confirm a fact that I have found. That means this will help us to verify the facts, help us to cross-check the information that we get. That means here we are using two or more methods for a comprehensive understanding of the phenomena. Now, the philosophy behind this is that if you have different perspectives, those different perspectives can be captured for getting a complete picture of the phenomenon that we are studying. Because if you have two, three other things, it's like getting multiple shades of the problem, and this can generate different accounts, and those accounts can be compared with each other so that you can get a better picture of the phenomena that you are studying. Now this method basically focuses, you see, this is one of the aspects, that triangulation is one of the aspects. Second aspect is its focus is on respondents' validation. It is a check for validity and accuracy of the information that we have. That means respondents who give you the information, they verify and say this is perfect. It could be argued that respondents can vary, but then the information that we gather can be cross-checked across. So it has both theoretical and ethical consideration built into this. This is a philosophically and otherwise it's a very important step. So qualitative approach, when you really look at it, it can offer insights. while the quantitative approach provides us perspective. Now, we need both insight and also perspective, because both are essential for understanding the phenomenon under study. So, mixed method basically leads to, because we are saying that we discuss with, we show to the respondents our kind of findings and then verify it. That means it can lead to more democratic participation of the respondents, unlike any single approach that can either be autocratic or can be bureaucratic. Because if a government survey is being done, you just simply go like a bureaucratic approach, or you say this is the only thing, I will not listen to any others. So mixed method doesn't allow that. So that's where it can be used in multiple kinds of platforms or fora, including evaluations or including kind of course correction kind of researches. So mixed method designs can adopt, another advantage is they can adopt to both they can take into consideration both qualitative and quantitative methods depending on the local context. That means I don't need to uniformly follow the same kind of tools or adopt same kind of tools. Depending on the context, depending on the kind of situation, I can vary. That means I can use one side the focus group discussions or any other kinds of methods of triangulation. So the best reliance, therefore, to put it in a nutshell, the best reliance is on triangulation, comparison and contrasting, while integrating different types of data. That is an important aspect of the mixed method. Here, what is important for us to remember is, it's quite challenging to design mixed method for any study. Whether the study is about evaluation or the study is about longitudinal studies or a short-term research studies. There are different typologies of mixed method, which for an introductory course you may not need it right now, but basically to understand what these three are and how they are important for designing, I think that should be enough to talk about it. So what a mixed method requires is most important one is, it requires multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary teamwork, unlike the other ones. And also the issues that need to be taken note of are basically issues relating to sampling, issues relating to analysis and issues relating to interpretation. That means you have certain kinds of issues that one need to understand and deal with, and you also need some kind of multidisciplinarity, and because the information that we gather, it need not be only unifocused, it's multifocused. So therefore we need to take into consideration many of these factors. So given all three, we find mixed method has a lot of advantages, and it is slightly more complex but more positive in giving us better insights, better results, better understanding the problem in multiple directions or multiple perspectives, because that has now given the major thrust to the mixed methods, and now mixed methods are the in thing in any kind of research studies and social sciences. Thank you.